I want to give you a little bit of perspective on this because bridging skills or any of the connecting skills that you encounter will actually increase the likelihood of your sales call being successful. And we'll talk a bit about that throughout the course of today's program. This is not a highly interactive program, so I encourage you to sit back, relax, listen. I will be sending everyone a copy of the written material as well as the audio. It does take a while for the audio to propagate, so it may be tomorrow before you get that version. It says on the subtitle, the capacity to listen, bridge, connect, and demonstrate understanding is quite important. And I would say that is a profound minimalization of what the research demonstrates bridging skills will do for you on selling, in selling situations. What we know is that successful salespeople approach every sales call as if it's a conversation that is mutually beneficial, not just to us as sales executives, but it is actually informative to the customer. The customer is allowed to think about their situation in new ways because we challenge them to look at their current reality, to look at their circumstances, even look at their background and determine what could be different about their situation. Now, I am of the impression that the greatest competition that we have when we sell to any individual is the status quo. It's what they currently do that they're used to and they perceive does not cost them anything. Now, that's an erroneous opinion or thinking on the part of the customer because they could be spending tens of thousands of dollars to do what they currently do, or they could actually be losing tens of thousands of dollars doing what they currently do. So the purpose of bridging skills is to demonstrate to the customer that we've heard what they said, that we're working with them to look for mutually beneficial reasons for expanding our relationship, and that we can easily offset the cost of what we are presenting through the savings that they would derive using our services. So I always say to folks that successful sales calls use 3 to 5 times more bridging and connective skills than any unsuccessful sales calls do. Now, salespeople attempt to sell to customer needs. The difficulty is that salespeople have a tendency to see needs before the customer does. So in actuality, the pure definition of what a salesperson sees is an opportunity. It's the potential that their product or service can be valuable to the customer. It is not a desire on the part of the customer to do anything about their status quo. So if salespeople are successful, they need to truly differentiate themselves from what the customer is currently doing. And connective skills give the salesperson an opportunity to deepen that sales conversation and ensure that the conversation is going to be mutually beneficial throughout the program. Now, for the purpose of this program, I'm going to talk about acknowledging, confirming, positioning, and checking. And you can separate yourself from the competition and from the status quo if you make a lasting impression with the customer using these skills. And each of these skills is going to affect the level of trust that you obtain from your customers, becoming what I call the consultative seller. Now, the very first thing that we need to understand about the whole selling interaction is that this is an exercise in listening. Your ability to communicate successfully with customers as either a skilled speaker, but more importantly, your proficiency as a listener is really the goal. And there are 3 levels of listening that I talk about in Sales Pro PSS, and for that matter, most salespeople talk about these 3 levels, but we really don't take the time to stop and think about how these levels are put into place in our sales calls. Now, level 1 listening is the ideal. This is where there is complete attention on the part of the customer. And it's the highest level of listening. You're tuned in to the customer. No one listens at level 1 all of the time. And one challenge to maintaining level 1 listening is, quite frankly, that the average person absorbs information 3 times faster than anyone can speak. So about 2/3 of the time of our listening, we're not focusing on what someone else is saying so much as we're beginning to focus on using that extra time to the best of our ability. We multitask. And that's where level 2 listening comes into place. Our attention varies from full to partial to perhaps no listening. And the reason we might have no listening is we're so accustomed to hearing what the customer is telling us that we go into autopilot. We hear words, but they sound so much like the words that other customers have verbalized to us that are in the same situation. So we find time to check out. We check out and we just don't listen anymore. As a matter of fact, what we do is we start to listen to ourselves and we start to think about, what could I say next? And what would make me sound really intelligent if I expressed it as my next probe or my next question? And after a while, you tune in a little bit to what the customer says and you verify, oh yeah, they're still on that diatribe that sounds like every other customer that I talk to at this point. So we go from partial to none. Now, the 3rd level of listening is the absolute lowest level of listening. And this is where, for all practical purposes, we're not listening to the customer at all. Now, in the written material, I've given you a recap of the details of each of these types of listening, level 1, level 2, level 3, and then I give you a comparison between the 3. But for all intents and purposes, what I shared with you is our goal is to move toward complete attention, careful listening. And we want to demonstrate to the customer through our body language, our actions, and the use of the connective skills. of acknowledging, confirming, positioning, and checking that we're actually hearing what the customer is expressing to us. You see, we want to win the customer's respect. We want to determine a direction that that customer is going in. I give you the image of the marshmallow because many of you have heard me tell the marshmallow story, that when we're looking for needs, very frequently in dealing with customers, we will see an opportunity, which is only the potential that our product or service is going to help that customer. It does not fulfill the desire on the part of the customer. So we have a tendency to want to swallow the marshmallow, if you will, or to treat the opportunity as a need, when in actuality, the customer is still focused on how they do what they currently do. So we've got to focus on hearing more, not speaking, but internalizing what the customer is sharing with us. Now, the first skill that I want to deal with by breaking it down is acknowledging. Acknowledging means that you make a statement that expresses empathy for what the customer has actually said, what they've expressed. Acknowledging statements help establish a bond between a salesperson and a customer, and they can have significant impact on the outcome of a sales call. Acknowledgements occur at any point in a sales conversation. And remember what I said. There are, on successful sales calls, upwards of 3 to 5 times as many acknowledgments as on unsuccessful sales calls. Now, I leave you the quote that even the pleading eyes of cows behind a fence demonstrate empathy. Animals instinctually know whether you are paying attention to them. My wife is an inherent cat whisperer, and I will tell you that it's through her body actions, her whispers, her conversations, her eye contact that she demonstrates to kittens and cats that they're being heard. Your customers are the same way. They want to look at you and know that you are committed to the language that they're sharing with you. So it's not enough to just hear the words that your customer says. You want to tip your head. You want to uncross your arms. You want to lean in. You want to take good notes. You want to review what the customer has said. So as the customer expresses opportunities, which are the potential that your product or service can help them, we want to understand that just because the customer expresses an opportunity, it does not mean that they automatically have a need. So slow the process down. Demonstrate that you are listening at deep levels with them by responding as they verbalize a desire to have something with statements like these. Helping your staff learn a new procedure can be challenging. Many of our customers have similar financing needs. I can see why you'd want to keep your prices in line. I understand how important it can be to shorten processing time. It's always a good idea to keep the team involved in decisions that affect them. Now, each of these are responses to needs, desires that customers have expressed to you. See, this is a very critical time in a sales call because the customer has begun to move from statements of opportunity, which represent potential, to statements of desire, statements of a need to have something to accomplish. By putting a bridging statement in, it demonstrates to the customer that you heard what they said. Now, they may also make general statements that are not expressions of needs, but they're good, solid general statements that are important for us to demonstrate to the customer that we heard, because we'll take it into consideration as we make a recommendation to them in moving forward. You might say, I see. That's a good point. Or that's an interesting idea. I would want to do the same thing. You might even say, I agree, or that makes sense. Now, be careful with some of these that you don't box yourself into a corner by agreeing to something that later on you're going to negate by presenting your option to that client. When customers raise objections, which I always call concerns, because I really believe that the presence of a customer concern is evidence that a customer wants to do business with me. So I would say something like, I can see how you might think that. Many managers share the same concern. Keeping costs in line is important. Based on your past experience, I can understand why you might feel that way. Now, what's the value in acknowledging? Acknowledging demonstrates to the customer that you heard what they said and that your recommendation is based on what they have told you about their situation, about their status quo. Now, when should you acknowledge during the course of a sales conversation? My response here would be, anytime you want to demonstrate to the customer that you heard what they said, you should acknowledge. And how often should you acknowledge? As often as is useful to keep the sales call natural. Acknowledging can be used at any time. It demonstrates that you heard what they said and that you understand their point of view. You understand their perspective. Now, another bridge that we talked about earlier was confirming. Confirming means that we have taken the time to listen and understand, and that the customer's opinion is important. But confirming is, I want to be absolutely sure that I understand what you said. So I'm going to restate it in such a fashion that I give a thumbs up or get a thumbs up from the customer. You're simply making sure that you and the customer have a mutual understanding of what has been said. Now, you can confirm by asking a closed probe. And going back to the Sales Pro class that some of you participated in, closed probes limit the response to yes or no, or a single quantifiable fact, or a short answer. So some examples of confirmation closed probes that you might use to confirm your understanding is, you might say, do I have that right? Is that it? So you're looking for a way to blank, blank, blank. Is that correct? It sounds like blank, 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 right? You'd like help with blank, blank, blank. Have I understood that correctly? Now, obviously, blank, blank, blank is what you heard them say, and it's just a restatement to confirm that you're hearing it in the same way. Let me see if I understand. Your main concern is blank, blank, blank. Is that what you're saying? So to summarize, you're saying the problem is blank, 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 right? Let me be absolutely sure I understand. Most of your staff is looking for a change because blank, blank, blank. Is that it? So you're in agreement with blank, blank, blank. Is that correct? Now, whose benefit is the confirmation statement for? Yours or for the salesperson? Well, the truth of the matter is, while everybody benefits, the confirmation is really most beneficial for the salesperson because it communicates how well they are expressing themselves and how much they have understood about what the customer is sharing with them. Now, why do you want to avoid using exactly the same words that have been used by the customer or the prospect? Anyone can repeat the same words that they've heard. You want to show understanding, and you have to add the context and the relevant commentary as you interpret it. So that's why you want to hear the words, put them in your own language, and play them back to the customer so that they're sure that you understand what they were trying to communicate to you. Now, the next bridging skill that I want to review with you is my all-time favorite. I call it the time machine. It's actually the positioning statement. And the positioning statement puts what you're about to say in context. It provides a framework. It's the skeleton of the customer, for the customer to refer to as they interact with your dialogue, with your conversation. It establishes links for you with the creation of a level of trust that customers are ultimately going to need to have in order to do business with you. So I found this image of bees crossing over, and I thought, wow, what a marvelous natural example this provides for us in a sales call and developing a level of trust. The very critical point in positioning a sales call that less than 9% of all salespeople use is positioning the opening of a sales call. It's at the very beginning of a sales call when you want to establish a comfortable tone that really sets the stage for an open exchange of information with the customer. It usually occurs just after you've finished any small talk that you've done with your client. Now, I'm not a big small talk user. Having recently come through the playoffs in baseball and the World Series, I know that the morning after every game, particularly the longest game that played until almost 4 o'clock in the morning, it was undoubtable that sales calls that next morning probably started with an extra cup of coffee, some toothpicks to keep each other's eyes open, and some kind of commentary about the game. When you're ready to transition from small talk into the business at hand, the very first step that we do on a sales call is we position. And it's going to be something like this. The last time we met, we discussed such and such. When we spoke on the phone, you indicated blank. At our last meeting, you asked me to develop some quotations on what a proposal might look like for an economical mid-range and high-range solution. I read in a recent article about your company that you were expanding internationally. Your director suggested that I speak with you about organizations like yours often find themselves looking for blank. Now, all of these reference back to how today's call came about. Now, you can position at any point during a sales call. You can position your opening. You can even position your probes. Sometimes you're going to ask customers questions, and in order to get the customers to be willing to answer the questions, you might help them understand why you're about to ask them the question. So it's useful to share the reason for a question that you're about to ask them. So, for example, earlier you mentioned that your associate has some misgivings about investing in a research service. I'd like to know a little more about those misgivings so that I'm sure to be able to address them before we proceed with a proposal. What are her concerns? And then another example is many of our customers are finding that in order to differentiate themselves in this marketplace, they need to offer their customers luggage that's unique. With that in mind, what have you found to be important to your customers? So the positioning of the probe sets the stage for why you are about to ask that probe. Now, although it's not necessarily appropriate to position every single question that you ask on a sales call, positioning your probes can facilitate an open exchange of information. For example, the reason for a question you're about to ask isn't always obvious. You must ask a series of closed probe questions. Maybe you're about to move to a new topic area. Maybe you need information that the customer may be reluctant to provide you. So some other ways to position probes might be, so I can better understand your business, I'd like to hear what you think about. If I can ask you a few more questions about blank, it will help us work toward a more effective solution. Now, the next positioning happens when you are moving from transition into closing. And for the benefit of all of us to review, we have opening, probing, transitioning, and closing. We talked about how surprisingly few needs in the order of importance are necessary to close a sales call. As a matter of fact, it's about 2.3 of the most important needs. Now, on one sales call, there may be 5 needs. On one sales call, there may be 1 need. But in general, the average is 2.3. So you will frequently find yourself in the position of positioning for review of benefits when you go to close. You're going to summarize the previously accepted benefits that the customer of what you have presented has indicated would allow them to move forward. Now, this could have happened on one sales call, or it could have happened on multiple sales calls. Some of us have ordering processes that take upwards of 18 months. Others are one-call closes. When you position your review of benefits, it is a natural part of the sales call, and it provides an opportunity for you as a salesperson to reinforce the ideas that took place on all of the previous sales calls or previously in this meeting. So you might say something like, let me recap some of the ways that we can help you achieve your goals. Let's go over the highlights of what we've talked about so far on all our previous visits. Let's review the ways that we can work with you to improve such and such. As we've discussed on our sales calls over the course of the last 6 months. And here you might review the points of view of several different people. So if you're calling on a nutritionist or a veterinarian or a dairy owner, or you're calling on a manager or a C-level executive or an HR executive, you'll review by positioning what each person indicated. Positioning is used to establish links between the customer's ideas, and it provides a powerful means for letting customers know that you appreciate their ideas and that you're willing to build on their ideas to work together to find a solution. So a quick example might be the solution you talked about for the accounting department might be combined with the manufacturing approach I described earlier. Now, in all cases, positioning can be a valuable tool in order to provide continuity throughout the organization. Now, finally, I want to talk to you about checking. Checking is to determine whether we're getting close or not. It's really for a determination of the acceptance of the ideas that we are proposing. Perhaps we've just shared a very significant piece of information, and we say to the customer, would this help you solve your problem? Or does this seem feasible? Or how do you feel about that approach? It gives us an indication of the velocity of the sales call. Are you moving closer or are you moving further from the sale? In a lot of my coaching, when I'm doing Oculus coaching with salespeople on significant sales, some of you that will be listening know that I very frequently will turn to the velocity chart, and we will look at the checking of whether your call is moving toward close or not. And you want to align your checking statements with where the analytics of your sales call tell you that you are. Now, in the written material, I've given you some examples of checking, some of which I've just shared with you. But I want to give you some final tips and techniques for positioning. Positioning can be used to redirect a conversation when it's gone off track. It links you back to the opening agenda for this sales call. At any point during the call, if I feel as if we've gone off track, I can come back to the agenda that we established. I will also use my notebooks that I keep in chronological order of visits with clients. Now, quite frankly, what my experience is with taking notes is I've taken chronological notes for over 30 years, which means that I can go back to any particular date and I can position back to a previous conversation that I had with a customer. In all likelihood, if you've been in one of my classes, I've made notes or I have ridden with you on sales calls. And I can refer back to January 28th, 19 whatever. And, you know, we may be going back 18 or 20 years, but I've got notes that tell me what happened on that call. So that's why I call positioning the time machine. I can go back to that point. Another thing I want to share with you is that acknowledging as many times is very natural in the conversation. The more you acknowledge, the better the outcome of the sales call is going to be. Ask someone to see how many times you check for acceptance during the sales call to ensure that you don't appear that you're being too focused on your own needs during the course of the conversation. Use customer language when you communicate with him or her. Don't mimic the customer, but use his or her words selectively to demonstrate mutuality. Now, mutuality is when you and I understand things in the same way. Then finally, check for acceptance by asking the customer his or her reactions to things that have been said throughout the call. Here are some examples of checking. How does that sound? Do you have any additional suggestions? Would that alleviate your concern? Would this help solve your problems? How do you feel about this kind of approach? Now, who benefits from checking for acceptance? Both the customer and the salesperson benefit from checking for acceptance because it illustrates to the customer that you're interested in his or her or their perspective, and it allows you to gauge where that customer is in their thinking. Now, why should checking for acceptance be phrased as a closed probe? Well, very simply, you want a definitive answer as to whether the customer accepts what the salesperson has said, what you have expressed to them. You're generally asking these checking for acceptance questions as you move toward the close. So it's very critical at this point that you don't hedge, that you don't ask an open probe, but you're very direct, you're very definitive, so that you get an answer that you can do something with to help that customer. Remember, stop selling, start helping. The more we demonstrate a desire to assist the customer, the more beneficial our relationship with that customer is going to be. So with that, folks, I have completed all of the material that I wanted to share with you today on bridging. As I indicated to those that are with us live, you will be receiving a copy of the material. You will also get a video that allows you to hear the audio portion of the program. But I thank you very much and look forward to having you join us on a later webinar. All our best. Take care.